fear their company isn't really going to succeed, so they come up with a way to inflate the share prices. It's really cowardice. Remember what we said about courage? Courage is fearing the right thing at the right time and in the right way. Fear the temptation to misrepresent who you are or what you've done or intend to do. Trust who you really are. Trust your ability to earn the respect of others. Pay whatever price the truth costs. Pay that bill immediately, because in the long run, it's a real bargain. When you're in a leadership position, whether it's in a business or as the head of a family, honesty and integrity are not as important as money or shelter or a telephone. Honesty and integrity are infinitely more important than any of those things. They're about as important as having air and food and water. For a leader, honesty and integrity are absolutely essential to survival. A lot of business people don't realize how closely they're being watched by their subordinates. Remember when you were a kid in grammar school, how you used to sit there staring at your teacher all day? By the end of the school year, I'll bet you could have done a perfect imitation of all your teacher's mannerisms. I'll bet you were aware of the slightest nuances in your teacher's voice, all the little clues that distinguished levels of meaning, that told you the difference between bluff and now I mean business. You were able to do that after 8 or 9 months of observation. Suppose you had 5 or 10 years. Do you think there would have been anything about your teacher you didn't know? As a manager, there probably isn't anything your people don't know about you right this minute. If you haven't been totally above board and honest with them, it's certain you haven't gotten away with it. But if you've been led to believe that you've gotten away with it, it's most likely because people are afraid of you. That's a problem in its own right. But there's another side of the coin, too. In any organization, people want to believe in their leaders. If you give them reason to trust you, they're not going to go looking for reasons to think otherwise. And they'll be just as perceptive about your positive qualities as they are about the negative ones. I heard a story of a situation that happened some time ago at a company in the Midwest. The wife of a new employee experienced complications in the delivery of a baby. There was a medical bill of more than $10,000, and the health insurance didn't want to cover it. The employee hadn't been on the payroll long enough. The pregnancy was a pre-existing condition, one thing or another. In any case, the employee was desperate. He approached the company CEO and asked him to talk to the insurance people. The CEO agreed, and the next thing the employee knew, the bill was gone. The charges were rescinded. But when he mentioned to some colleagues the way the CEO had so readily used his influence with the insurance company, they just shook their heads and smiled. The CEO had paid the bill out of his own pocket, and everybody knew it, no matter how quietly it had been done. An act of dishonesty can't be hidden, and it will instantly undermine the authority of a leader. But an act of integrity is just as obvious to all concerned. When you're in a leadership position, you have the choice of how you will be seen, but you will be seen one way or the other. Make no mistake about that. Leadership of a family demands even higher standards of honesty and integrity. And the stakes are higher, too. You can replace disgruntled employees and start over. You can even get a new job for yourself if it comes to that. But your family can't be shuffled like a deck of cards. If you haven't noticed, kids are great moral philosophers, especially as they get into adolescence. They're determined to discover and expose any kind of hypocrisy, phoniness, or lack of integrity on the part of authority figures. And if we're parents, that means us. It's frightening how unforgiving kids can be about this, But it really isn't a conscious decision on their part. It's just a necessary phase of growing up. They're testing everything, especially parents. In Arthur Miller's great play, Death of a Salesman, it's hard to believe that a son would so completely lose faith in his father based on a single incident of dishonesty. Once a parent has lost moral authority, it is very, very difficult to regain it. Studies have shown that children are extremely understanding about many things. If you accidentally step on a favorite toy, that will quickly be forgiven, if not forgotten. If you lose your job and the family has to move, they'll adjust. If parents just can't get along and decide to divorce, most kids can handle it, but they can't handle dishonesty. It can take many, many years before that will be forgiven. Many people keep pictures of their kids on their desks. Is it supposed to be a reminder of what they looked like? Is it showing them off for whoever comes into the office? Well, there is an even more important reason those pictures are there, or why they should be there. They're there to remind us of what's at stake when we make the decisions that determine character. And we all make many of those decisions every day. As a person of integrity yourself, you'll find it easy to teach integrity to your kids, and they in turn will find it easy to accept you as a teacher. This is a great opportunity and also a supreme responsibility, because kids simply must be taught to tell the truth, to mean what they say, and to say what they mean. There was something interesting about the Indians of the Southwest and the skills they felt were important for their children to know. Hiding was one of them. In a desert environment where you would think there was nowhere at all to hide except possibly by squeezing yourself behind a cactus plant, the Indian children could literally disappear. And running was another very important ability. Beginning as young as 6 or 7 years of age, Indian children were taught to run long distances while holding a mouthful of water in order to develop breath control. And of course, both running and hiding were skills that could save the life of an Indian child, as well as preserve the security of the group. Kids today must be taught skills that will save their lives. And integrity is one of those vitally important skills. Maybe it's hard to convince yourself of that. I heard a story of a man who flew propeller-driven anti-submarine planes for the Navy, piloted them on long flights over the water. He told of an incident when a storm was coming up, and they were faced with a difficult navigational problem in order to avoid it. The problem became even more difficult when the navigator revealed that he couldn't handle it. He cheated his way through some parts of the training, but that training material didn't seem like it would ever be very useful. I can't promise that it will ever save their lives, but nothing you will ever do is more important than teaching integrity to your children. There's an old saying, those who do can, and those who can't teach. But you really can't teach honesty unless you are honest yourself. You really can't teach integrity unless you also live with integrity. It's actually quite simple. Earlier I suggested that there might be some times when a certain amount of flexibility with the truth is appropriate. And I'd like to return to that now. It might be tempting, for the sake of consistency, to assert that you should always tell the whole truth exactly as you see it in every situation. But I've lived long enough in the real world to know things just aren't that simple. Shakespeare wrote of one of his characters, "Every man has his fault, and honesty is his. He is more honest than wise." Just as there is a difference between blowing hot air and premeditated dishonesty, there's also a difference between lying and recognizing the importance of diplomacy. How can you tell the difference? Your gut feelings will tell you. By the time we reach adulthood, I think most of us have extremely accurate ethical barometers built into our heads and hearts. We may choose to ignore what that ethical barometer tells us, but it's there nonetheless. When you're in a leadership role, I believe there's at least one situation in which you're almost always justified in stretching the truth to some degree. And here it is. You should overstate your degree of enthusiasm for your employees' work. You may use many, many carrots and very few sticks. Your recipe for dealing with subordinates should include at least 3 parts praise for every 1 part of criticism. Will this stretching of the truth cost you respect? I don't think so. Will a little sugarcoating of your true feelings foster greater productivity, better work, and improved morale? Absolutely. And that conclusion is supported by a great deal of behavioral science research. Praise is one of the world's most effective teaching and leadership tools. Criticism and blame, even if deserved, are counterproductive unless all other approaches have failed. Vince Lombardi, the late coach of the Green Bay Packers, certainly deserved his reputation as a tough manager and a man of strong character. But even he knew the importance of building up people's ego. You could have seen how this worked if you had the opportunity to attend a practice session of the Packers during the years when they were one of the most powerful football teams ever assembled. Lombardi had a quarterback from his scout team throwing passes against the first-string defense, and this young quarterback was obviously eager to impress the coach. But after the player had completed 3 or 4 passes in a row, Lombardi seemed anything but impressed. In fact, he seemed quite displeased, and he took the scrub quarterback aside. "What are you trying to do, wreck my team?" Lombardi snarled. "Start throwing interceptions." And you'd better believe he started throwing them. We can call it diplomacy or psychology or just plain flattery, but it often brings out the best in people, and it's the grease that keeps the machine of human interactions functioning smoothly. So honesty is the best policy, but sometimes a little less than total honesty is even better. We've been talking mostly about the importance of honesty and integrity in dealing with other people, but I want to conclude now by focusing on what those qualities mean to your relationship with yourself. I think a term from clinical psychology is useful here. The term is cognitive dissonance. And I'll use a quick example to illustrate what it means. Let's consider a man who is an expert on personal financial planning. He makes a good living advising people about life insurance, trust funds, and the various kinds of mortgages. But a great deal of his business is devoted to helping individuals who have gotten themselves deeply into debt, who need to tear up their credit cards and start saving instead of spending. Sometimes there is no alternative but declaring bankruptcy and starting over. We are so surprised when one day this expert on personal financial planning says that he is going out of business. "I just can't take the pressure anymore. It's too much stress." Well, we can understand that. It must be stressful facing the problems of one person after another who's gotten into trouble financially, to work through it with them day in and day out. But here is the big surprise. "I'm the one who's in trouble financially," he suddenly admits. "I'm behind on everything, even my car payment. And after lecturing about the perils of debt all day, I can't stand to look in the mirror anymore." Wow. This man is experiencing cognitive dissonance in an extreme form. He is trying to live with 2 conflicting images of himself in his head, and the strain is simply using up all his energy. He's fundamentally a good person. He really believes in doing the right thing.